Recently, I covered my personal list of the hardest mods in Breath of the Wild, and it got me thinking, could I combine some of these with some custom mods and still complete the game? So I took Relics of the Past and the Breath of the Wild randomizer, a truly vicious combo, and combined them with my Tiny Link mod and my 10x speed mod, and set myself some goals to complete. I wanted to complete the Great Plateau, obtain the Master Sword, complete the Colosseum, complete the Forgotten Temple, and of course, defeat Ganon. Now, some of those might not sound very difficult, but I assure you they were far from easy. For starters, the Tiny Link mod and the 10x speed mod might look hilarious, but they come with their own complications that make my life a lot more difficult. The Tiny Link mod makes parrying Guardian lasers impossible, and climbing most ledges and ladders becomes a serious chore, because Link's model thinks he has reached the top when in reality he still has a few feet to go. And the 10x speed definitely gives me an advantage when I'm paragliding, but if I'm just running or walking normally, I get a seriously bad case of the speed wobbles and end up running in every direction really quickly, but not really actually going anywhere. And in Relics, if you lose your movement, you lose your life. Now it's worth noting the randomizer won't start warping you to random locations until you gain the paraglider, as to give you a chance to complete the plateau and not completely break the game. However, when you combine it with Relics, you get the paraglider immediately, which meant the plateau suddenly became a chore to complete. Not only was I fighting for my life, but I was fighting just to get into any of the shrines. I was caught in a mind-numbing loop of random warps for an hour straight, and even when I did manage to get into the shrines, the powers themselves were randomized, which meant I had to collect all the powers and then travel back to each shrine to actually complete them. But a Relics plateau is never truly complete without fighting a Lionel. So I went to collect some weapons and some attack up food, and then I had to wait for the thunderstorm to end so I could cook and actually use the weapons I had collected. Except the storm didn't end. As if it was some kind of sick joke, I sat and waited out of sheer spite for the game until I realized that maybe something had gone wrong with the mods, because in all the time I was waiting, the randomizer hadn't done anything. So I headed to Death Mountain to try and force a weather change, and still nothing. So after 20 minutes of waiting, I had to admit defeat and reload. Now it was time to actually fight the Lionel, and I was curious how the fight would go with my reduced size and increased speed. Honestly, it felt like I had an unfair advantage over the Lionel, because as long as I stayed targeted, my movement was very easy to control. The randomizer even threw in a Malice Moblin, but in this big field, I was still able to control the fight. That was until I got warped away, and honestly, by this point, I was mentally broken from all the warps. So I went back, equipped the strongest weapon I had, and bullied the poor Lionel. I wasn't allowing the randomizer to spawn anything, warp me, or pull some other nonsense on me before I was able to kill this Lionel. And with that, the plateau was complete. The next objective was the Master Sword. It was time to head to the Korok Forest and pray to Hylia that the randomizer would be kind while I struggled through the onslaught of horror that lay in wait. But before I could get there, something strange happened. Of all the nightmares I was expecting to find in Hyrule Field, I can safely say that Dark Beast was not one of them. And it wasn't just Dark Beast. He had brought his full entourage with him. Suddenly, all the Bokoblins, Lionels, and Guardians you could poke a stick at had surrounded me. And you can probably guess how that went. Unfortunately for me though, it didn't end when I died. Dark Beast was still rampaging around in Hyrule Field, and the game really wasn't happy about me not being in the barrier with him. So instead of breaking the game further, I decided to do the safe option and reload a save. This time I made it to Korok Forest and began clearing out enemies, making my way through the forest one kill at a time, and it was actually going really well. The speed once again was a big advantage here. I was able to evade enemies and retreat from the fog with relative ease, until this guy decided to put an end to me, which I wasn't a big fan of. So when I got back up to him, I made sure he didn't have a chance to do it again. Before I could get anywhere near the Master Sword, I still needed to defeat the 3 mini-bosses. I hate to admit it, but I cheesed the Guardian and the Octorok with Ancient and Bomb Arrows. Only because I had no way of fighting the Guardian, and the Octorok shoots bombs and has a gang of Stals with it. I did make sure to still fight the Lionel properly though, and it was much the same as the Lionel on the Great Plateau. I was able to easily outmaneuver him while dashing in and attacking at every opening. And with all 3 mini-bosses defeated, I had finally gained access to the Master Sword. So I made my way to the goddess statue to get enough hearts to pull the sword, and the randomizer decided we can't have nice things in this world, and sure enough, it warped me. And to top it all off, I hadn't unlocked the shrine while I was there, so I couldn't warp back. Cool. The randomizer changed the environment for my return trip and removed all the fog in the Korok Forest, which definitely made for an interesting walk in the woods because it didn't actually remove the fog, it only removed my ability to see it. So I had to rely on muscle memory to get back to the sword, and this time I made sure to activate the shrine before I was warped out of there again. It was time to pull the sword, and Tiny Link always makes the cutscenes a 10 out of 10 experience to watch. It reminds me of that fever dream of a movie, Arthur and the Invisibles. Did you know they made 3 of these? 3 of this movie. That's actually crazy. Anyway, I was now making my way towards the Colosseum to complete the next objective. For those of you that don't know, Relics makes sure the Colosseum is a place of nightmares. I was about to head in when I realized something was missing. The Master Sword that I had just pulled was no longer in my inventory. I thought maybe I just needed to pick it up again, but it wasn't even there anymore. Well, at least it couldn't get any worse. Alright, it could. After being scammed out of a Master Sword, I headed back to the Colosseum and I really wasn't sure how this was going to go, or if I'd even be able to complete it. I was up against 2 Lynels, 2 Sentry Guardians, and an onslaught of Bokoblins, Moblins, and Lizalfos all strewn throughout the Colosseum. But, as it turns out, being a small, fast-moving target made the Guardian's job a lot more difficult. I was able to avoid the Lynels and Guardian beams so well that even when 2 Bokoblins spawned in, I was still able to get around for long enough that I could take out the Guardians and work on dwindling down the numbers on the ground floor. All I had to do was be patient and wait for the breaks between Lynel attacks, and then focus on taking out the Bokkos. After removing the Lynels, I was honestly surprised with how easily I handled the fight. I then worked my way from the top down, clearing out the remaining enemies until I had completely emptied the Colosseum. And even though things seemed to be going better than expected, that didn't mean it was about to get any easier, because the next 2 objectives on my list were really going to test me. I was feeling good with how smoothly this run had gone, all things considered. I made my way over to the Forgotten Temple to tackle the 4th objective on my list, and had to visit the Good Luck Korok before going in. I'm taking this as a sign of good things to come. Oh, that's not... no.
Liar!
Unlike the Colosseum, my small stature and high speed made navigating and fighting in this area incredibly difficult. Add on the fact that I couldn't parry any of the lasers, and you start to understand why I died 15 times before I was able to make any meaningful strategy. There were 2 rooms totaling 24 Guardians, 18 in the first room and 6 in the second, and they were all hell-bent on ruining my day. I didn't want to just fly through at high speeds and ancient arrow them all, but there were a few I had no choice but to take out with a bow, simply because I couldn't actually reach them any other way. After that, thanks to being the size of a Korok, I was able to move around the room using each Guardian I was fighting as cover from the rest, as a way of reducing the 24-1 to a much more manageable 1v1. I was even able to use pieces of rubble that would usually be meaningless as reliable cover from the Guardians. It only took me around 12 minutes to clear out all 24 Guardians, but sadly it wasn't over yet, because the next room had one last challenge for me. 3 Malice Moblins. Each equipped with increased health, attack, and its stun box had been removed, so you can't just headshot them for an easy stun lock. I had to draw them out one by one, and use my speed to run in, attack, and get out again before they had a chance to react. I had managed to get it down to one last Moblin when the randomizer threw me a twist, and set me on fire. It quickly became a battle of attrition between me and the randomizer, but thankfully the weather soon changed again. I was no longer taking any chances and decided to keep my distance and waste a few weapons playing it safe, so I didn't have to reset on the final enemy. The Forgotten Temple had been completed, and I was left hoping that that would be the worst of it. Oh my gosh, was I wrong. However, before I headed to Hyrule Castle, I wanted to stock up on food and arrows, as well as collect some more weapons in preparation for the fights to come. And I guess the randomizer felt bad for scamming me earlier because it finally gave me the Master Sword back. I then made my way towards Hyrule Castle to complete the last objective left on my list, and I had zero strategy in mind for how I was going to tackle this. For starters, Relics makes it so you can't enter the Sanctum until you have cleared both the guardhouses. One is filled with a bunch of Guardians and a Lynel, and the other simply has 3 Lynels in it, 2 gold and 1 silver. In both situations, you were dealing with very confined spaces and a lot of dangerous enemies. I tried to complete the first guardhouse without spamming ancient arrows on the Guardians, and it didn't really work out so well. I managed to defeat the Guardians, but this non-existent hitbox cursed Stalehead jebaited me into forgetting about the Lynel. So for round 2, I simply spammed the ancient arrows and took out the Guardians as quick as possible, leaving me to deal with the Lynel. And despite my enclosed space, he really wasn't much of a hassle. I was a bit worried about dealing with 3 Lynels altogether, so I took inspiration from a pack of lions and focused on the weakest one first. My increased speed definitely helped with avoiding the other 2 while I dealt with the silver Lynel, and once he was taken care of, I simply repeated the process with the other two. Now that the guardhouses were complete, I was able to make my way up to the sanctum, and I have to say I really thought the 10x speed was going to be a massive hindrance during this playthrough, but once I figured out that I could control my movement by constantly targeting, it was actually a massive benefit, and helped me dodge a lot of danger. So I opted for dodging the guardians, knowing the real fight was just up ahead. Okay, you see this guy? Yeah, he isn't supposed to be there. See, usually with relics, you're supposed to fight through a wave of bokoblins and moblins, then a wave of Yiga, then a Malice Guardian, and then right at the end you fight the Lionel. At least that's what I thought. Turns out they added one to the beginning as well. It actually sort of worked in my favor though, because its slam deals like 30,000 damage, and it actually ended up helping me clear the waves of enemies. Now that I knew he was there, I had a strategy. Use my speed to avoid any unnecessary combat, and coax the Lionel into using its slam to take out the enemies for me. Easier said than done though, especially when the randomizer insisted on warping me to the Trial of the Sword. This actually worked in my favor again though, because when I got back, it triggered him to slam again, removing the last of the Yiga and moving me up to the Malice Guardian, which I was able to make short work of with an Ancient Arrow. And once it was dealt with, 2 Yiga foot soldiers spawned and almost ended my entire run, but thankfully, Mipha was there to save me. Now I just had to deal with the hardest Lionel and relics, and there was 2 of them. All I could do was stay on the defensive and try not to waste too many shields while I waited for an opening to attack. And waiting paid off as the randomizer gave me Daruk's protection, but I still hadn't had the opportunity to get in any attacks. I tried to run in and it immediately went wrong, but thankfully I had a fairy from when it warped me to the Trial of the Sword earlier. I had no choice but to take it slow. I couldn't afford any more mistakes like that, but they were perfectly in sync. One of them was always attacking when the other wasn't. I took another risk and once again I was saved by Mipha, until finally it happened. The Lionel slammed, killing the other and leaving me to fight a 1v1. And I had already managed to drop the remaining Lionel's health quite a bit, so I was feeling confident. Finally the Lionel was down, and only the Blights stood between me and Ganon. Out of all the Blights, there was only one I was really worried about, and that was Thunderblight. Because in Relics, he gets a massive speed boost, and you only get about half a frame to react to his attack. Even if I managed to get the Flurry Rush, my small size meant I couldn't deal significant damage, and the longer this fight went on, the more danger I was in. Needless to say, my palms were sweaty, and I was locked in. It was right here I thought I made a fatal mistake, as I threw my weapon at him as he began to attack. But somehow I managed to get out of the way and get the Flurry Rush that would ultimately end this fight. It had all led to this moment. 2 guardhouses, 4 waves of enemies, and all 4 Blights, and now it was time to face the final objective on my list. I really underestimated how hard this fight was going to be. Being small and fast meant I was easily able to duck in and out and deal damage without being hit. And it was going well, but he had a lot of health, and I wasn't exactly dealing a lot of damage. It got worse when I accidentally ate a heat resistance food and lost my attack up. The last attack up I had. This meant the fight was drawn out for a long time, and all it takes is one mistake for it all to go horribly wrong. I eventually made my way back to Ganon, and this time I kept my attack up. But I hadn't thought about the second phase, because if you remember, as Tiny Link, I can't parry lasers, nor can I really Flurry Rush very effectively. And the only times I could actually hurt Ganon in his golden form was if I parried his laser or Flurry Rushed his attacks. This meant one thing. I died. And I died again. And the major concern I was having through all of this was, without being able to parry his lasers, every time he climbed onto the wall, he just refilled his health and undid all the progress I had made. I was accepting the fact that this might not even be possible to complete. Until I did this. I had realized that with the angle he is firing his lasers from, that if I step back just a little after he fires it, I can actually get Link into position to parry the laser. Not only that, but I could also parry his slams, giving me yet another opportunity to deal damage. I could do this. It was possible. And eventually, after many attempts, I had finally won. I had completed all the objectives I set out for myself, and emerged a slightly more insane individual for it. But now, all that was left was to clean up Dark Beast.
Nope.
Oh,